meeting of the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. We will now continue with our agenda, and I will ask Chris Lemos to provide an update from the Budget and Productivity Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will give you a partial update, and then I'll ask Seth to jump in because I missed, I think, my first BPC meeting a couple of weeks, 3 weeks ago. But I do want to let my colleagues know around the table that our next Budget Productivity Committee meeting, we're going to have the benefit of having our institutional partners come in and lay out their capital needs over the next few years. And we thought that might be a BPC meeting that others on the commission might like to sit in and listen to. It should be really instructive. I know I am really looking forward to those presentations from our partners. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Seth to talk about what we have on the agenda today, which is some expedited action for capital.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Commissioner Lemos, thank you very much. Really quickly, that is on December 14th at 3:30. I'll be circulating the agenda. I'll go ahead and share that agenda with the full commission in case you're interested in attending in person or virtually for that meeting, where we're going to be hearing from the public institutions on their capital plans.
That's the 13th.
What day?
The 14th, should be the 14th, Thursday, December 14th.
Yeah.
And then, as Chris mentioned, we had a few capital projects presented at our last committee meeting. There was a lot of really good discussion, and you will have one item for full discussion today, as well as a few expedited items that should be in your packets. I will note there's some supplemental information in the back of your agenda book related to a few of those expedited items. As Purdue was kind enough to provide us some additional materials, including, I think, some graphics and maps. But with that, I think we'll turn it over to Ann from Purdue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. And yes, this is the one capital project for full discussion. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the commission. It's great to be with you this afternoon. I am joined today by Nathan Mangus, who is the Senior Director of Real Estate on our administrative operations team, and we are here today to seek your approval of a lease that was approved by our Board of Trustees in October. So in this project, we are seeking to lease 175 beds from Madison Lofts LLC, who owns Fuse West Lafayette, and this lease would be for the 2024 and 2025 academic years. I will note that this lease is a renewal from the current academic year, and it would consolidate two smaller leases into one. And this is being done at the request of the Fuse ownership. We are confident that we will have no issue filling these beds. They are near campus. Specifically, they are across from Mackey Arena. And we continue to have a very strong demand for housing on campus and in the community. In particular, we have found that leasing apartment style housing offers an excellent option for some of our returning upperclassmen who've lived in our university operating housing earlier in their academic career and would like to continue in that type of amenity. And by leasing apartment style housing, this allows us to focus some of our more traditional dorm housing style housing than on freshmen and our new beginners. Lastly, by wrapping these smaller leases into one, we're able to lock in better long-term prices and secure year-over-year savings. We are estimating saving roughly $250,000 in the first year of this lease and $200,000 during the second year. I want to highlight that because the rental market in West Lafayette and the surrounding region is extremely hot. This lease will enable us to keep housing affordable for our students. Rents for this particular property have gone up over 20% from the past year. And with this lease instrument, we are able to limit our increases to 8% each year. In addition, I would note that we do not generate a profit on these leases. Our goal is to negotiate savings by this scale and then pass them on to our students. So the value of this lease is $4,585,746, and it would be paid from auxiliary funds from housing and dining. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Did you say your rent, sorry, did you say rent's going up 8% a year?
If we are successful with this lease, we can limit the increase to 8%. But if it was just out on the open market, it would be more than 20% for this particular property.
Wow.
That's only for this property, not for all of our.
I see. How much does your housing in general go up?
We actually haven't raised housing rates since 2012, and we have the lowest housing rates in the Big Ten.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you. With that, we'll have Seth provide a recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I think one thing I would also like to note with that with that combination of the two previous lease projects, one of those was under our review threshold of $500,000 for lease review that we, the commission, provide. And so bringing that in did bring the total lease up considerably, setting aside the 8% rate increase. But it also provides, I think, a little bit greater opportunity for the commission to see a wider breadth of the housing agreements that Purdue and the other institutions provide when they are combined like that. And then the only other thing I would like to note as a reminder is just a general, I think, a reminder for the commission is that our review threshold is $500,000 for lease agreements. And it is $2 million for capital projects, whether that's purchasing, construction, et cetera. So just as a general reminder, we do also have a lower threshold. But with that in mind, staff does recommend approval of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. May I have a motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The project is approved. And I believe we now have 3 capital projects for expedited action listed in your agenda book beginning on page 19. If there are no questions.
Madam Chairman, I do have a question, maybe could use some clarification. On one of them, and I apologize because I might have asked this question if I had attended the last meeting, but I was not able to be there. But I was looking at the project that is between the Wesley Foundation and Purdue University, $7.5 million for 1/3 an acre. And I was surprised by that and wondering what is the relationship between Wesley or the Wesley Foundation and Purdue University and why that size of money for such a small lot. I just was curious.
Thanks for that question and happy to provide a little context in addition to a specific answer on that question. The Wesley Foundation project is necessary for us to move forward on expanding the Mitchell E. Daniels Jr. School of Business, which is one of our 3 strategic pillars. And in order to complete or to begin the process of building what we intend to build there, we need to relocate the Wesley Foundation, which is one of the longest serving organizations on the campus. They did not want to move, so we worked closely with them to come up with a plan to keep them whole. And so what you see in this project is a land transfer as well as a cash payment that will enable them to build a new facility that is similar to what they have. And that $7.5 million was determined using a combination of land appraisal value and a building feasibility study. Any premium that the project reflects is really the reality that this is the last parcel of land on the block, and we need this particular parcel to complete the plans for the Daniels School of Business expansion, which will really be a signature asset to that part of campus. Lastly, this is being paid for with gift funds, and we have worked closely with the donors through the Purdue for Life Foundation, and they are comfortable with this transaction.
Thank you.
Does that answer your
helps me.
question?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Any other questions? Thank you. And I'll do one more round. Any other questions on other items May I have a motion?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The project is approved. We will now move on to the Career and Technical Education, CTE, with Tony Harrell, as he presents an update on CTE, blurring the lines between education and workforce presentation. Tony, thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I want to start by thanking you for your support of the title change this morning. Really looking forward to the opportunity to serve on the executive team committee, but more importantly, looking forward to the opportunity to continue this kind of full integration of CTE into the work of the commission. So that's a really exciting part of all that has taken place today. Also looking forward to the opportunity to share with you some details about CTE. I know when we presented at the previous meeting, there was a lot of questions around what is CTE and maybe a little bit about why it's at the commission. So hopefully we'll be able to answer those for you today. But I am also happy to report that the transition is official. If you remember at the previous meeting, we had asked you to approve the Perkins State Plan. That has been submitted, and along with some additional documentation that was requested by the U.S. Department of Education. All of that has been approved. All of that is finalized. And now the commission now serves as the eligible agency for CTE. We wanted to share this slide with you. As you can note from this slide in the middle there, we have a new CT Career and Technical Education logo. We put this together just from the idea of we've been working with Doug and Allison on a rebranding strategy for CTE. As we came over to the commission, we wanted to make sure that people knew that not only were we there, but we were also an integral part of the commission, and that our work was going hand in hand with the work of the commission. So one of the things that we really strived for as we were trying to come up with a new logo was we wanted to make that logo similar to the logos for the other initiatives. So as you can see, it is very similar. It follows the same style, same format as Learn More Indiana, as well as the 21st Century Scholars Program. So we're excited to have this. It'll really help us to kind of move forward with the development of some new resources. A couple of things about the logo that I think is really interesting that maybe will stand out as we go through this presentation a little bit more is the symbols around the ampersand that are included in here. The left-hand side of that represents a gear, mechanical gear, which I think gives a nod to kind of our trades programs and our traditional CTE programs. But then on the right-hand side, you'll see the electrical schematic there that kind of hints at some of our more modern programs of study, whether it's in IT, computer technology, but also just kind of represents that idea that things have evolved. So we'll try to start with probably the toughest question that we get all the time, and that is, what is CTE? Most of the time when you ask somebody, well, what do you know about career and technical education? They're going to tell you, well, isn't that vocational ed? That is a term that we've really tried to get away from over the last few years because it's not completely representative of all that we do in career and technical education. Vocational, voc ed, as it was often referred to, really does kind of go back to those trades, the skilled trades, the construction, the welding, those types of programs. And while we still have all of those programs, and they're as needed today as they've ever been, we've also expanded. We've also evolved to include programs of study, in high wage, high skill positions like fields like health science, IT, business, agriculture. All of those programs now fall under career and technical education. The other thing that I wanted to talk about with this slide is we've really been trying to emphasize the message over the last couple of years. CTE is college. When we look at our programs of study, and Sam Rourke, who is our director of implementation, and Communications is going to talk a little bit about our programs of study today with you. But when we look at those, nearly all of those have college credit built into them. They are transferable, they are stackable, they lead to associate degrees, and in many cases, they lead to bachelor's degrees through TSAT programs. And we still have a lot of work to do around this message that CTE is college, but we really do want to emphasize that CTE is college, not just an alternative to a four-year program, and not just for those students that don't want to go to college. Now, maybe we'll accomplish that while they're in high school, but we really do want to emphasize that point of what we're doing. So the other thing that I wanted to share with you is a little bit, where does CTE fit into this whole system? Not only how does it fit into with the commission, but how does it fit into the workforce development system? And I remember back to the May meeting, Josh and Greg had done a presentation about 1002 and all of the things that had came to the commission through that bill. And I believe it was Commission Member Lamoth that commented about the apparent desire for the commission to play a more significant role in workforce development and K-12 in the talent pipeline. Well, we couldn't agree more with that assessment. But we also think that that's another reason or further evidence as to why career and technical education is a perfect fit to be at the commission. CTE is perfectly positioned to serve as that bridge, not only between education and the workforce, but also to serve as that connection point between workforce development and industry and employers, as well as that connection between K-12 education and higher education. So we just wanted to kind of share this with you to give you an image of this. I think there's a lot of things that give evidence to this. When CTE was transitioned to the governor's workforce cabinet in 2019, there was one of the things that happened is we brought secondary and post-secondary CTE under one roof. And that was important. That was really important for us to accomplish the work that we wanted to accomplish with the programs of study. But the other reason why that was important is because it changed who we were working with on a daily basis. Instead of just working with secondary schools to provide those programs, we were now heavily involved with post-secondary schools, both in their alignment and delivery of programs, but also on the workforce development side, intermediaries like Ascend, workforce boards, working with industry associations like TechPoint and Connexus to help them truly address some of the talent pipeline needs that we have in key industries is something that has become a part of what we do on a daily basis. So hopefully this gives you kind of a feel for, okay, well, this is where CTE is, this is where we can help. It just seems like there's a lot of conversations that take place that we can always play a part in. And I should have said this at the beginning. I am trying to go really fast to be respectful of the time. But if there is a question or something that we can answer, by all means, please just kind of flag me down. I'll slow down and take a breath at that point. But so we wanted to talk a little bit about how CTE was delivered. I think this is a key concept in order to be able to understand CTE a little bit better. We have several different models in the state of Indiana for how CTE is delivered. And primarily we're talking about right now at the secondary level. But if we look at this on the far left, you're going to see like a career center approach that is shared here. That career center approach, basically, we have about 31 career centers out of our 54 secondary CTE districts. They each have, they differ in the number of sending schools that they have, but the idea is that the career center houses the programs and the sending schools then send their students to the career center. The other model that we have that is very common, and we have about 18 of those CTE district models, is a cooperative model where you will have a group of high schools or secondary schools that will say, okay, why don't you do these 2 or 3 programs? We'll do these 2 or 3 programs. And then this school over here will do another 2 or 3 programs, and then the students share depending upon what their interest areas are. Those are the most common models that we have around our CTE districts, but one of the things that we're seeing a great deal of increase in is some alternative models to delivering CTE. Part of the reason for this is out of necessity. We've just simply reached capacity in a lot of our career centers. We've reached capacity in a lot of our co-op programs, and we've got to find additional opportunities for students. And so what we are seeing is, especially universities like Ivy Tech, Community College, Vincennes, where they are actually offering dual enrollment programs. The dual enrollment programming may take place on campus, or they may provide the instructor and provide that dual enrollment programming right there at the high school campus. And that has become very popular here in recent years as we've gone through this. The other thing, and I put this on here partly because it relates very closely to the 1002 bill that was already mentioned, is this idea of a joint program of CTE. More and more, we have employers that are stepping up and leading the CTE program. They might partner with an eligible training provider. They might partner with a post-secondary institution, but they will certainly try to bring students into their facilities, their factories, and have the students participate in work-based learning programs. And in some cases, the employer is actually providing the training for the student or providing the instruction for those students. Earlier this morning, Commissioner Lowry talked about our 3 primary metrics that we look at in CTE. And we wanted to make sure that we talked about those metrics. They're an important part of what we're trying to accomplish. But we wanted to frame this, the U.S. Department of Ed, through their Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, which is who we answer to for the Federal Perkins Grant, recently has been undergoing this Raise the Bar initiative. As a part of this Raise the Bar initiative, they have outlined that there are 4 key components to unlocking career success for students. And these are going to sound pretty familiar to you. If you look at 1002, all of these components are built into that. But then also, if you look at our CTE programming, as well as when you think about the redesigning high school elements that you've heard about, all of these are a part of that. But they include the career advising, the career coaching and navigation, which is a huge part of the bill that was recently passed during this last session. But the other 3 components are actual outcomes that we're trying to achieve for our students that are participating in CTE programs. And that is dual credit attainment, credential attainment, and work-based learning participation. I would add to this, I kind of getting away from the Hoosier humility a little bit. We were recently at a meeting where we were praised, the state of Indiana was praised because when given the opportunity, we had to select one of these measures of program quality for our Perkins metrics. And in the state of Indiana, we decided that we were going to select all 3 because we felt like they gave us the best picture or the most complete picture of a CTE program and what it has to offer. The other district or the other states that were there were actually encouraged to kind of pick up that model of adopting and monitoring all 3 of these outcomes. It turns out we are one of 3 states in the country that actually chooses to monitor all 3. And with that, the one thing I would like to say about our team, and then I'm going to have some of our directors come up and talk a little bit about what their responsibilities are. One of the huge advantages about being able to come over to the commission is we are fully staffed for the first time in 2 or 3 years. It is amazing how much that you can find to do when you are fully staffed and how much we look at this and say, okay, now we can finally do things the right way. So that has been great. Our team is really divided up into 3 different groups or 3 different teams within that. They focus in on, we have 2 individuals that are focused on grant administration and monitoring. We have 2 individuals that are focused on our data and accountability systems. And then we have a programming team of 4 different individuals. And so with that, I am going to first invite Sam Rourke to come up and talk a little bit about our next level programs of study, which is a huge part of our redesign efforts, and to introduce his programming team.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Like Tony said, my name is Sam Rourke, and then we have 3 members of our programming team, which are back here. So we have Lindsay, Jennifer, and Charles in the back there. So we make up the programming side of things. We're on right. Okay. So that's kind of overseeing the various, programs of study that the state offers, and primarily the vast majority of our time is kind of in the secondary space, answering, questions from counselors and directors and others who are working to implement programs of study across the state. So when we look at this first slide here, we're kind of just thinking about the idea of a career pathway, a program of study. We might use kind of either of those terms. You're going to have that career exploration phase, earlier on, maybe kind of more in the middle school phase. You're going to be thinking more about career coaching, career advising. We play a role in that space. Our secondary programs of study are primarily going to be kind of in that yellow and blue on that slide, the career preparation phase. And that's where a student's going to be going through a program of study at the high school level, beginning to earn college credit, work towards credentials, participate in work-based learning, et cetera. And then obviously, in the vast majority of our programs, there's the ability to continue on that career pathway to some sort of additional post-secondary training that they might pursue after high school. All right, so we wanted to kind of think about our programs of study through this lens here to hopefully give you kind of a picture of the stackability aspect. I know we use that word a lot. Hopefully this kind of helps visualize the stackable aspects that someone can go down in terms of a program of study. So the first, we're going to start with CT, concentrator status. That's a term you'll hear a lot in career and technical education. That's a very kind of high school specific word. It meets a particular graduation requirement. And so that's the kind of first place that a student would get within a program of study. And we've worked through our redesigning of the secondary program of study to really make that consistent across the state, that's a meaningful metric that someone has reached within a program of study. And then from there, you're going to have opportunities to earn additional certifications, certificates. You'll kind of see, in that certificate in the next phase, that's where you would get more to like a TC at technical certificate at Ivy Tech, or a certificate of graduation at Vincennes, and then on through an associate's or a bachelor's. And obviously with different programs of study, some of them don't fit quite as neatly with, a certificate and then associates and then a bachelor's. It kind of depends on the program of study. But generally there's some kind of stackable aspect within each program of study. And you can see we've kind of put like some career outcomes over here on the right in terms of occupations that someone might be able to obtain at each level of education. Okay, and then lastly, for my part here, we've got about 65 secondary programs of study. And what we wanted to do here was originally had this kind of the 16 different career clusters. So you have advanced manufacturing, IT, healthcare, kind of across a business, a variety of different career areas. We went with this instead to kind of show you some programs are more aligned towards, you know, a certificate or a certification, right? That's starting there on the left. Some are more aligned towards a 2-year program that they're kind of, you're starting in high school, right? And then some are, you're starting on what really, you know, ultimately, hopefully is a 4-year path. And you'll see some of those there on the right. So that is the programming piece. Before Laura and Chris have some kind of finance aspects and then some data to get to on the next few slides, any questions on the programming side?
Sam, if there are no questions, I'll make a couple of quick comments. First of all, very good presentation. And for commission members, a couple of things. The slide previous to this, if you could go back, maybe Sam, one slide, I think it's just an excellent example of how we need to be thinking about training and education, the stackability that Sam referenced, lifelong learning. And if you also look at this in this manner, it's also about mobility, economic and social mobility, starting one place and continuing to make progress. Our state provides a lot of support in regard to the student getting there. We have to raise the expectations, as has been noted this morning, to individual and their loved ones to do this, but that's a great example. And then Sam, if you go forward then to your last slide, commission members, what you'll also see, and again, I think this is part of the reason it's so important for this transition to occur. Those areas identified on this slide are going to grow, and very specifically, leaders from the IEDC, DOE, DWD, CHE, the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, are talking all the time, and especially so of late. When you consider, to a great degree, these areas referenced here constitute a lot of the framework of the base side of our economy. And if you think about the work of IEDC and the priority areas they've designated through innovation investments and acquisition activity, then we start thinking of the bioscience, life sciences area, microchips, EVs, hydrogen, some of those. So that's to say to all of you, fully expect from us to see those areas of focus coming before you with the CTE and the rest of the continuum. Nice job, Sanders.
While Laura is coming up, I just want to add a little bit to that. So those are actually already in the works. We already have a biotech life science, like a pharmaceutical manufacturing and medical device manufacturing pathway that can be offered starting in high school, that can run through post-secondary. In our course titles and descriptions, we have capstone courses that are now available to go along with a program, established programs of study for semiconductor manufacturing and fabrication, as well as the EV battery, which really shares some common manufacturing practices. But we work very closely with different industry associations to make sure that we are truly trying to stay on top of things and meet the needs of employers and our economy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and she's going to share a little bit with you about the investment that Indiana makes in CTE.
Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon. Laura Tucker. I am half of the fiscal team, CTE fiscal team, not the fiscal team. The other half, Kathleen Ash. She is the grants manager. She also leads our work with civil rights compliance, which is great work to ensure that CTE programs are offered equitably to all students. So she is the lead on that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the federal funding, which is probably the smallest chunk, but also very important for career and technical education. My colleague Chris will come up and talk about the state investment. So Perkins, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education in the 21st Century Act, commonly referred to as Perkins 5, was signed in 2018. Indiana receives 22 million. I think this year we received 22 million and a little bit of change, and that's Kathleen and I's primary responsibility in addition to the monitoring aspect. Really, the purpose of this funding is to provide students with quality programs, CTE programs, instruction to help align secondary and post-secondary, that leading to credentials, that slide that we talked a little bit more about. That's kind of Perkins' focus. And then also career preparation. So Indiana, the commission is, for the first time, the recipient and pass-through agency for these funds. So we thought we would take a couple extra minutes, even though the chunk of that pie is a little bit smaller. It is important work. And really, like, the spirit of Perkins is innovation for CTE, not like program maintenance. And so that's important. I was in a meeting and they referenced it as like seeds of innovation. So although it's not the primary piece of the pie, it really does direct a lot of our work. And you'll hear a little bit about Perkins 5 when Chris refers to some of our concentrators as well. So there's three kind of chunks of money, which Perkins tells us how we're going to spend. Some of those things are mandated in the law. Some of those things are optional. So I'll kind of share a little bit about what we do with those funds. So those administration funds, that 1.2 million you see up on the slide, we can use those to ensure that we are following grant regulations, federal guidelines. There are very, it is a very particular grant. And so making sure that we understand the responsibility of that is part of those administrative funds. We also can use those funds for our subrecipient monitoring. We can also use those funds to help develop our state plan, which I think Tony is going to reference in some future slides. It's not a large pot of money, but it does that work. The leadership funds are, I think, our most flexible funds. Those we must. So this is kind of that category where there are some mandates and some options. And so we must support individuals in state institutions. We do that through MOUs with the Department of Corrections. There's a juvenile justice program and adult program. We also must support students in non-traditional fields. And so when you think of a non-traditional field, women in STEM, women in welding, so that gender gap. And so promoting students into non-traditional fields. And then we must use those funds to support, Perkins calls them special populations, low income English language learners, students with disabilities kind of fall into that category for that support. So those are things we must do with leadership funds. We can and do support our career and technical student organizations, DECA, FFA. Hopefully some of those names are familiar to you. So those receive support out of leadership funds. We also can provide competitive grants, and those can be available to anyone. And so we have done education readiness grants, and there's been some other intentional grants which anyone can apply for. And that is a little bit different than that last chunk, that largest chunk, the basic distribution. And this is the money that Kathleen and I are primarily talking about. We were talking a little bit about some allowability questions even at lunch with Commissioner Lowry. But so these funds are distributed to 74 subrecipients. 54 of them are secondary, 20 of them post-secondary, including all of the Ivy Tech sites and Vincennes University. And so those 74 subrecipients receive allocations of those funds based on a federal formula. And there is an entire section of Perkins which tells how they can use those local funds. And so primarily we see them spending those funds to start new programs, update equipment, purchase materials to run the program. Some districts use those funds for support positions. So like work-based learning coordinators, career counselors. Some have kind of creatively chosen some support staff to support English language learners, students with disabilities. That's really a population of career and technical education that is really overpopulated. If you looked at kind of where students are landing, a lot of students with special needs do fall into that. So there's a lot of support there. And there's also a reserve fund where we can distribute competitive grants, but those competitive grants can only be offered to those 74. So that large chunk of money is really housed with those 74 district subrecipients. So that, although the small chunk of pie, we talk a little bit more about Perkins because the commission is the pass-through agency for those funds. We we are following federal guidelines and we are passing through those funds. SET's team's been incredible help getting that off the ground, and we are rolling. We have access to this year's grant for 27 months. So it's a little bit of an extended grant than maybe a traditional 12-month school year grant. So that's a little bit different about this as well. So that's the federal portion. Any questions for me? And I'll pass it over to Chris if not. Okay, great. Yeah.
All right, my name is Chris Deaton. I am the Director of Data Collection and Accountability. That's a two-person team. Right back there, Jeff Vance, the other member of the team. As Kathleen, or as Laura said, the other part of the funding is the state dollars. So that's last year it was about $179 million. We're working on that this year right now, and we are looking, I'm guessing, about 193 million. So still growing. When I first started doing this, it was about, and I guess when this formula first started, it was about 75 million. So we've gone from 75 all the way up to almost 200 now. The funding is based on the 3 categories of courses there on that's the main area, I guess, those 3. The high, moderate, less than moderate. So depending on the flame level, which is a calculation that's done at DWD, they designate each occupation with a flame rating. Those occupations are linked to courses. And then so the flame level of the jobs tied to the course, that's how the course funding gets assigned. So, and that's what generates this year around 93 million. So that is the funding part. Okay, so in CTE last year, there were about 228,000 students that were funded. So again, we only fund fall enrollments. So with those state dollars. So 228,000 last year, students, 348,000 enrollments. This year, we're at last check about 353,000 enrollments. So still growing in enrollments. So far this year. So about 60% of high school students in Indiana, each cohort takes some sort of CTE courses. So we expect that to continue to grow. The students in the schools are seeing the value of the courses and the certifications and the dual credits. And work-based learning, I guess, also that these courses offer. So again, I think we expect these to continue to grow. Graduation pathways that was introduced, CTE is a part of that. That's also a big reason why I think our enrollments are growing as more students look to use concentrator status and industry certification as their graduation pathway. So for graduation pathways, students there are several obviously ways for them to graduate. The ones that are using CTE concentrator status as their grad pathway has gone up the last 3 cohorts. In 2020, it was 6%, and then 21 it was 17%, and then 22 it was about 23%. So that's of the cohort, what percentage uses CTE concentrator status as their graduation pathway. So again, a lot of students are achieving it that are not using it, but these are the ones who actually use it because they're not meeting any other graduation pathway. And we expect to continue to see that growth in CTE. People are finding that there's that population of students that they may have a hard time passing some tests that learn better with using their hands and using hands-on stuff. So it is a good pathway for those students to get to graduation. So I was really fast. Is there any questions for me? Right. Back to Phil.
So just, I wanted just one thing about the investment piece, the amount of money that goes into the CTE system. You know, there was also a third part of that pie that talks about like dual credit funding. There's large numbers. I mean, we've heard as much as, like Ivy Tech has shared with us that 54 to 55% of all of their dual credit that is awarded to high school students comes through CTE courses. I think that's probably something that would hold true for the state as well. So you've got the dual credit funding that goes out to the public institutions. You've also got credential completion grants. There was a line item that was included in the state budget this past year that increased to pay for certification exams of high school students. It went from $200,000 for the previous 2 years to $2 million a year. So there's a significant investment in terms of CTE and career and technical education for the state of Indiana. This really does far exceed what other states do, which is great for our students. And it also gives us a chance to have a significant impact on what we are doing. I've got about 3 slides here that I just wanted to share with you real quickly, but there are 4 metrics that we talk about all the time. We've already talked about 3 of these. We've already talked about the dual credit, the credential attainment, and the work-based learning participation. The 4th one that we do monitor and we keep a pretty close tab on is placement. And this idea of, is a student within 2 quarters after graduation, are they employed, enlisted, or enrolled in a post-secondary education program? All of these numbers are reported as a % of concentrators. But as you see that we have, this past year, we had 31,000, over 31,000 concentrators. That is out of a single cohort. So that's out of about 85,000 students. There were 31,000 concentrators. We will be reporting those numbers with these percents as we go along. As we kind of look at some of these other metrics, though, you can see credential attainment at 26.2%. Of all CTE concentrators earn a credential. If you look at 38.53, we are one of the national leaders in terms of the number of dual credits that our students receive in CTE programming. We've been asked to speak multiple times about the system in Indiana, what contributes to this idea of earning dual credits. And then work-based learning participation is at 23.06%. I do want to talk just a little bit about why those numbers look so low. The biggest reason that those numbers are somewhat low is because we have really high standards for what we count. So for example, in dual credit attainment, it's not just the attainment of 1 college credit. We actually require a concentrator to earn 9 or more college credits in a pathway in order to count towards that metric. Part of the reason we did that is because graduation pathway says that a student can meet college and career readiness if they complete 3 college level courses. So that was the reason why we chose 9. Obviously, most college courses are 3 credits. When we look at credential attainment, we only count credentials that are on the graduation pathways list. So when we talk about a credential like OSHA 10 or OSHA 30, which is valuable to employers, but quite honestly, it is not that valuable to an individual student, because if they're hired, they're going to have to do it again. Anyway, we're looking at those higher level certifications, those higher level post-secondary credentials, that those are the only ones that count towards that number. And then when we talk about work-based learning participation, we require that to be at least 75 hours in length, and it has to be at a single placement. The reason why the single placement piece is important is because if I do 4 20-hour work-based learning experiences at 4 different places, all I ever do is do orientation. So by setting 75 hours at one place, which is also a graduation pathways kind of expectation, we can dive into and really make sure that they are doing meaningful tasks as a part of that.
And the only quick question, and that may be an impossible question to answer. When I look at credential attainment, post-secondary, blue credits, and work-based learning, and those percentages, are those percentages on students that are engaged with this program? And if so, what percentage of students are engaged in this versus the population of high school students?
Yeah, great question. It's a little weedy to kind of get to this, but again, so all of these percentages are a percentage of concentrators, those students that earn concentrator status in a pathway within a given cohort. So these numbers are actually from the 21-22 cohort. We will be reporting at the end of January our 22-23 cohort. I was listening very intently to Commissioner Lowry's presentation this morning about, the problem with higher ed data, and quite honestly, this is all education data, is that it's always a year and a half old or older. So the challenge for us is really going to be, how do we use projections and forecasting to be able to kind of make some decisions. So that's the first part. This is of that cohort. So going back to the previous slide, if I go back to 22-23, we had 31,777 concentrators. That is over a third of, thank you, whoever did that. That is over a third of that high school cohort. There's an estimate of about 85,000 students in that cohort. That's generally what we use. So you can see that's well over a third. So we're looking at that cohort. Now, one of the things that we're going to see, and this is the real challenge for us, because during this first 4 or 5 years of Perkins 5, we've really been focused on redesigning the programs of study. And we've gotten them to the point where we've redesigned them, we've got them implemented. 24-25 will be the first year that is all that is available for students. The challenge is going to be, how do we implement those with fidelity? And that's what we're trying to gear up for. And our definition of fidelity is, how do we make sure that those numbers stay where they're at? So for example, when we go and we look at 38.53% of post-secondary dual credits, well, that's 38.5% of all concentrators. Well, if our concentrators go up to like 35 or 40,000 students, then that means we have to have that much of an increase in the number of students that are earning 9 or more dual credits in a pathway. So again, some of these numbers are actually going to go down. It is because we have more and more students that are earning concentrator status, but the percentages are going to go down, but the raw numbers of students that are accomplishing those outcomes are significantly increasing by 2,000 or 3,000 students per cohort is what we've seen. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, yeah, that's
Okay. So it really wouldn't be a commission meeting, or it wouldn't be appropriate if we went all the way through this and we didn't talk at all about post-secondary CTE. I think this is one of the things that is very common when we talk about Perkins 5, when we talk about CTE. We really tend to, and I'm not sure why this is, but it always seems to talk about post-secondary CTE as what it can do for secondary. And I think one of our goals that we would like to see come through our strategic planning process is, how do we improve the quality of CTE that's happening at the post-secondary level as well? We've had great support from Ivy Tech, VU, and quite honestly, even the 4-year institutions in terms of aligning their dual credit, or aligning their courses to dual credit options in our new CTE programs of study. We are the envy of most states when we talk about our programs of study and the stackability to credentials and what we've been able to accomplish. But we still need to take a look at post-secondary performance, like for their adult students and their traditional post-secondary students. And that's one thing that we're hoping that comes out of this. One of the things that will really help with that is we have a very extensive list of secondary metrics that we have to do. We have a very limited list of post-secondary metrics, and there's some very funny accounting rules with those metrics that we need to work on as a state, and we need to look at going forward. I think when we start looking at the performance funding model, we'll actually be able to draw some inspiration from there about what types of things should we be monitoring when it comes to post-secondary CTE programs. Lastly, I do want to talk about the strategic planning process. So coming to the Commission for Higher Education, just the timing of it and everything really creates an opportunity for us to create a long-term strategic plan for CTE going forward. It also happens to coincide with the requirement for us to develop a new Perkins State plan. when we put those two things together, it just makes sense for us. If we can come up with that strategic plan, we can then use the Perkins plan as kind of our action steps or our action plans, or as Laura said, that seeds of innovation. So that is what we're going to be working on. The next step in that is we are in the process of gathering stakeholder feedback. Stakeholder feedback will come in the form of, we're going to be talking with students, we're going to talk with industry and employers. We're also going to be meeting with our principals and directors as well as our school counselors as we go through this process. We will do that through the end of the month. We'll spend a lot of time in January and February putting together the draft of the plan that will be available in March of 2024. That gives us a couple of months that we can get public comment and to do everything else that we need to before we submit the plan. The last part of this that I would like to share with you, we are in the process of forming an advisory council for CTE. This will have representatives from all of our major stakeholder groups. We would, if there's interest from a commission member, we would gladly have you be a part of that advisory council. The plan is that right now we're going to have two meetings. We're going to have one in about mid-December. At that mid-December meeting, there's going to be two main things. We want to look at our performance data from the past school year. And then we also want to look at the themes and ideas and suggestions that came out of our listening sessions. And then towards the end of January, then we will have another meeting of that council to help us kind of get that state plan and the strategic plan across the finish line. I know that's a lot to take in, but if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are you coordinating your stakeholder meetings with the commission's existing stakeholder meetings?
So we're doing this a little bit differently this year, partly because of the tight timeline. We did accompany Commissioner Lowry on the two trips prior to the last stakeholder meeting, but we really only have about a month here or a month and a half to get our stakeholder feedback completed. So we are actually going to, we are working with our CTE directors around the state right now to do what we call performance labs, which is just showing them how to look at their data and giving them a couple of different tools. And then we are going to be working with a consulting firm to help us actually facilitate some focus groups at each of the sites. So when it is all said and done, our stakeholder groups will be representative of basically Northeast, Northwest, Central Indiana, and then Southeast and Southwest.
Tony, I don't really have a question. I would like to compliment you and your team because I think this was a very succinct presentation, and I'm sensitive that you guys have been kind of out in the woods on your own and battling on something that's critically important to our state. Now you've got a home, and now I have these huge expectations that you and your staff are going to take us to #1 in the country. So thank you.
So thank you. We appreciate the comments, and we do appreciate kind of having a home. It's been when you transition twice in less than 4 years, that's a lot.
Thank you. I want to echo my colleague in saying this is very impressive and very subtle from the outset. I note your description of the logo, and to make sure or trying to transition us from a space where quote unquote college, the trades are constantly fighting.
Yeah.
So you begin to at least appreciate why there are some people who don't want to go into even higher level manufacturing because some type of stigma associated with it.
Yeah.
Versus saying, well, there's a path for everybody. And all dignified work is worth aspiring to if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
So just from the outset, I appreciated that. And then just acknowledge, well, one question as you talk about the strategy, and just my observations just going through the day, that the AAR, kind of the tour, looking here inside the school. I feel like I'm in a foreign country. I don't see any blacks. And so I heard the presentation earlier about, being conscious of maybe making sure there are students in representation. And so especially as you think about your strategic plan, I would just like to hear some thought, feedback, observations. I don't know, just consciousness raising about that because it just seems to be stark by its absence.
Yeah, so there's 2 or 3 different things that I would kind of point to. The first is that as a part of our annual report that we submit to the feds each year, we have to complete an analysis of our disaggregated data. So that disaggregated data is obviously around race, ethnicity, gender, and also special populations. So students with disabilities, English learners, and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. The performance labs that I was just talking about is really a piece of the equity piece of our comprehensive local needs assessment that each of those 74 districts have to complete prior to submitting their plan for spending the Perkins funding that they receive. Those, what we are doing, and Lindsay has been doing a tremendous job of organizing this for us, is we have provided them with 2 different tools. One of those tools looks at CTE enrollments based upon disaggregated numbers to make sure that certain population groups are not overrepresented or underrepresented. And then the other tool that we have is a tool that looks at disaggregated performance data. So we are looking at these 4 metrics that I shared with you. The reason I share all that with you is because the idea is that the districts will then formulate goals around equity and accessibility for their programs of study. I can tell you that the last year when we put together our narrative around our disaggregated data, one of the things that was concerning to us is that Black students that were participating in CTE were not enjoying the same positive outcomes pretty much across the board as the other population groups. And so this is something that is particularly important to us. I think one of the things that we're looking at is trying to figure out, is this a possibility that, I hate to call out a specific district, but I've got to use like Indianapolis Public Schools. Indianapolis Public Schools has a tremendously difficult time of attracting instructors that can be dual credit credentialed, that can provide those certifications. If there's things through the reserve grant that Laura mentioned, she just mentioned this a little bit, but we can use those reserve grants to help address opportunity or performance gaps within a school. And that could be a gap that's within a school or a gap between the school's performance and our state average. So there are several things that we are doing on that front. I would tell you, we're not there yet, but we need to get there very quickly. I mean, it is something that is at top of mind and certainly will be something that we look at through the strategic planning process.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the thorough response. I don't know if you think there's any way I might be able to be of help. I'd be honored, but again, I'm very appreciative of the comprehensive body of work and the thorough presentation. Outstanding.
Thank you.
Well,
As Madam Chair, as Tony sits down, I'll take just a quick second. Thank you for the comments, pardon me, from commission members. And it's through that analysis of and seeking insight from the data, just as the data Tony was talking about, that we're going to find better direction. Not that I would ask you to go back and look at it. Slide 24 that I presented this morning. We disaggregated data for you, for all of you looking at the college going rate, male, female, by race and ethnicity. When we find those and then find the tools, like just the one example that Tony mentioned, and I think Laura had mentioned too, then we can get to some of these root causes and say, okay, now how can we address these? I'd also tack onto this, and I so appreciated a comment Tony made in his last or next to last slide. there has been a focus for so long. How do we improve just what's that, the secondary level of CTE? I think we are already as a team seeing a number of things from which we can learn for higher education, for post-secondary education. By the way, not just CTE, but in other areas to improve what we're doing. When we look at 228,000 students or 60%, those types of numbers, we have to have serious consideration about what we're doing to help them with matriculation beyond high school. This is an oyster in front of us, and bringing these groups, bringing CTE into CHE, I think was brilliant on the part of folks who thought of it. I didn't, so there's the disclaimer. But at the risk of embarrassing them, I would just say out loud to all of you as commission members, we are delighted that Tony, Sam, Laura, Chris, Kathleen, Jed, Jennifer, Lindsay, and Charles are part of Team CHE. And a couple of different people were texting me, by the way, Tony and team, during your presentations. The one that was my favorite was essentially, these are passionate experts. And I could not agree more. Madam Chair.
And I will second that by saying thank you, Tony and team. Great presentation. And next, we will now be welcoming Dr. Stacey Townsley to present an update on the Credit for Prior Learning Collaboration Project.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. And I realize I stand between you and the end of the meeting.
And Stacey, might I note real quick, we can find all this information starting on page 53 of your agenda book. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I start off with every presentation I do in this role with these numbers. These shouldn't be new to you. There are over 2 million adults, or nearly 2 million adults here in Indiana without a post-secondary credential. About 40% of them have some college but no degree. We ask the question, how can we support these adults in achieving some form of training or credential or degree beyond high school? And you've heard that one of our goals is to become a top 10 state in the utilization of credit for prior learning. We know that from national research, and you might recall the last commission meeting in September, I spent some time walking through, giving a background around credit for prior learning, showing a visualization of credit for prior learning in the higher education ecosystem. Also highlighted national research, and I wanted to pull out these numbers yet again that show that those students who earn credit for prior learning, who are awarded credit for prior learning, have a 17% increase in completion rates compared to those who did not receive CPL. We also see it's a very strong enrollment and retention tool for institutions, that those with CPL tend to earn on average a 17.6 additional credits. So these are compelling numbers. And we see CPL as a foundational piece for adult strategy. And so with that, I wanted to speak briefly to the Commission's CPL efforts over the last 3 years. Our current initiative is really building on momentum that started 3 years or even earlier, led by Dr. Ken Sauer and his academic affairs staff, really in partnership with Thomas P. Miller and Associates, now referred to as TPMA, and CALE, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. They began this phased work back in 2021 and during the pandemic with a partnership with Ivy Tech to develop declining occupational crosswalks to show pathways to higher wage, higher demand occupations, and utilizing the skills and the learning gained from those previous occupations. In phase 2 of this work, again with TPMA and CALE as partners, really focusing attention on standing up an initial statewide task force that really helped us identify those needs and opportunities across Indiana, higher education, really resulting in that basics credit for prior learning clearinghouse that we have on our website right now, and a report that really informed the phase of work that we're in currently. And this is, we began this in June, again in partnership with TPMA and CALE, where we really continued to build on this work. We stood up 3 targeted task force work groups, really focusing in on how do we develop a statewide data collection strategy around credit for prior learning, because we don't know what we don't know, right? How do we then build on this idea of a clearinghouse, create a library, make this of use for stakeholders, not only for the individual seeking what can they do with their whatever it is that they're bringing to the table, but creating a tool for both institutions, employers, workforce development partners, et cetera, to really see how we can leverage credit for prior learning. And last but not least, a workforce, or a task force group really focusing in on developing a model policy guidance around credit for prior learning. And I think I mentioned last time that this group has been meeting, we have about 75 participants across a number of stakeholder groups, met virtually and very intensively throughout the summer. We had a final large group gathering in October, really zeroing in on helping to refine this draft policy guidance that we have in front of, that you have in your packet, really identifying what is it that they need to implement the recommendations coming out of this group, and thinking about how do we help individuals serve as ambassadors, not only on campuses, but across different organizations, about raising awareness and expanding those opportunities for credit for prior learning. We also included some professional development opportunities in this time frame. I mentioned them briefly, a webinar on the fundamentals of credit for prior learning, and a deeper dive workshop really geared towards faculty members and others who are working very closely with credit for prior learning. So what I wanted to do today is really just walk you through this draft state model policy. You do have a draft copy in your packet. We also had copies out there. The idea is that although this is still in draft form and it will continue to be a living document, we wanted to give you a sense because, again, we do have a resolution as part of this work that we're hoping that you would adopt as you think about this policy. So again, this policy was initially adapted from various other state examples out there, but I will note that there are fewer than 10 states out there currently with a CPL policy. So we would still be one of the first few out there to develop such policy. And it was really shaped then by the task force recommendations over the past few months. The goal was to find areas where we can agree. And we know that we still have work to do. It's still in draft form, but I'm very encouraged by all of the active participation and contributions from the group. The implementation of this policy draft is still up to the institutions. For example, there are guidelines for fees for credit for prior learning evaluation, but institutions have great flexibility in what those are and how they can implement them. The policy guidance language incorporates areas related to 5 topical areas, and those are the sections in the draft policy. And those are around CPL value statement, program and service design, transcription, transferability, the standards for assessing CPL, and community workforce and employer partnerships. And so I'll briefly highlight, I don't want to get into the details because it's a pretty thick document, on each of these slides, some of those sections. So the value statement really does set the stage from which the rest of the document flows. And there are several phrases within the value statement itself which establish the philosophical positions of the task force and how this policy can be applied. Again, in the first 2 bullets here, it recognizes the learning comes from diverse sources, not just that individuals, the learning gained in a classroom. It also reinforces the commitment to non-traditional learners and the value of credit for prior learning for these individuals. And although the draft language has been modified from what was originally on this slide, because it's been in continuous development, I wanted to share that this value statement emphasizes the use of academically rigorous assessment methods to support the use of CPL, also in support of diverse institutional missions and credential completion for students. So again, all of that wrapped up into what I think is a succinct value statement.
The policy overview and the programs and service design section are really around these bulleted points: awarding credit, research and goal setting, tuition and fees, program design, student support services, awareness and transparency. For sake of time, I will highlight that we're really this is trying to be flexible, but it's also trying to be aspirational. And we'll note that in awarding the credit for prior learning, institutions should have clear policies and stand behind their evaluations. That CPL should be awarded after matriculation, because there are some concerns that if you award the credit and it's on the transcript, and if that individual is not pursuing the program that they initially thought, there's some financial aid implications, et cetera. But the institution really should be upfront and working with that individual to assess and to give an estimate, at least, of what that individual could potentially have. Again, it's a form of encouragement and as a form of guidance into that next step. Also, as part of this section, I think we highlight the intent is that for all academic programs to include CPL opportunities. This isn't necessarily the case right now. But again, there's that flexibility to really target high demand programs first, but really with the lens towards opening it up to all. And again, around tuition and fees, focusing on consistency, transparency. There's guidance there that it should not be any fees that are assigned should not be more than 25% of tuition for the equivalency of that course. And then also just, again, around student support services, focus here is that institutions should have well-informed, proactive advising and the staff should be knowledgeable and have the resources they need to deliver services. So again, as we think about hearing from those institutions about what it is that they need to implement, move us forward in credit for prior learning, where can we be of assistance? How can we help think through untapping, uncorking capacity? And then lastly, around awareness and transparency, this is reflective of this idea of a clearinghouse where it will serve as a central repository of policies and practices, and ultimately down the road, ideally, highlight those actual credential pathways that are tied to credit for prior learning and help us understand how that all relates to skills and all of the frameworks that our workforce development partners and employers are using, and bring it together and make it a cohesive picture. Thank you. In the transcription, transferability, and data section, we do highlight the fact that data collection, the institutions will submit CPL data through the annual CHEDS collection process, with those specific data points to be detailed in a separate data policy. And I will note that our business intelligence team, and especially Alex Parkinson, has been actively engaged in leading those conversations. We expect to see movement in that area in early 2024. If Alex is in the room, he'd be nodding, I'm sure. Highlighting the fact that we are going to follow ACRO best practices, which is the national organization around registrars, and that credit should be awarded for specific courses, again, with an eye towards transferability. And then thinking through the fact and encouraging the transferability of CPL, thinking of it as just another form of transfer credit, right? That where possible, as long as it can be transparently shown how that information, how that CPL has been assessed and awarded, that other institutions should be willing to accept it. Yes, Nancy.
You may be getting to this, but first I want to thank you when you opened up the invitation to the commission members for the KO workshop or meeting. It was really great. And I always appreciate when staff doesn't mind us listening in on the great work that you do. But I think my big takeaway on that is relevant to this is that it's credit for prior learning, not credit for prior experience. Just because you did a job in something doesn't mean you actually learned the skill. And I wonder if you could just take a minute and elaborate a little bit on this notion of, you know, how do you assess that the person actually learned it and has the skills?
And that I would have to leave to our faculty experts. I know there are a few of them in the room. And I don't know, Chad, if you wanted to speak to that at all. But certainly there are criteria, like you'd want to meet at least a minimum of 70% of the course outcomes, right? There are specific demonstrations, challenge exams, whatever it is that could demonstrate that learning.
I think the takeaway, I was at the same workshop, and Stacy, your team deserves big credit for this work. It's really important. And really what this is higher education recognizing an individual's worth, because they bring a lot to the education system. And this is a pathway to recognize. In terms of the actual recognition of credit or how that works, I don't personally have experience with it. But I did pick up a few things from the workshop, and it's something that seems very needed and important.
Absolutely. It is a faculty-driven component of higher education. And I know that the methods of assessment vary, right, even by department. But the idea here is that you're going to bring consistency and rigor and transparency.
And Stacy, I'll add from a bit of experience, sometimes that assessment of the learning, and thanks for drawing that distinction, Nancy, does come in the form of something that might already be recognized in the form of a test. And so very specifically, an example I'll give you is, most of you know, in my former life, I was with Ivy Tech Community College. In the mid-teens, the credit began to be offered and accounted for in certain industrial and manufacturing related courses that specifically came from the Manufacturing Skill Standards Council, MSSC, in areas like certified production technician. So that served as an excellent proxy for then the faculty to look at and say, okay, you know, Chad had that, and as he comes in, accounting for these requirements, the learning for this course or this course. Now, Ivy Tech ultimately took it another step, which I think is really important, and started embedding specifically that type of certifications, CPT or certified production technician, into a credential. So that did a couple of things. Nancy came in and just started that program. She was going to get that while she was there. I moved in from Colorado and I had that certification. So it transferred in. So it's that evolutionary process. So in some instances there are proxies, but I will tell you this too, with regard to the faculty, they're very stringent on what they, you know, agree to and say this should count in order to honor that worth, that learning that somebody brings in, and as well it should be. It ought to be very stringent. But that's just one example, and there are many. I know Mary Jane had to leave, but I know she could give you. I could give you offline too, you know, including in IT and manufacturing and other areas that you know. And also I would put in there real quickly. I noticed Stacy has in here the average of 17 hours or so that are awarded. I think Purdue Globals is actually 25 hours.
It's not awarded. It was actually more credits taken at the institution than those who did not receive CBL.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the clarification there. So we fortunately have some experience in the state to help us move this along too.
And Commissioner, if I could just add one other point. What I took away from the presentation is the awarding of CPL is actually more rigorous than the awarding of transfer credit. And so I think it, you know, for folks who have a perception that it's easier, it's actually not. The demonstration is more significant. There's actually an assessment base that goes with it. And the guidelines that are there are actually descriptive. So in that sense, it's actually, I think, more rigorous than the two other means.
Excellent. And that leads us to the last, or the second to the last section of this, really focusing in on those standards for assessment. And just real quickly, I will say that in this section of the policy, it is the expectation that institutions review their policies periodically for quality control, right? And as we think about collecting data, all of that will inform the work. And we think about it in a way of a community of practice and helping others learn how they can do this better. And also in this section is exactly to your point, Nancy, the focus that the credit is given, awarded for college level learning and not the experience. And the very last section of this policy is the most flexible section because it simply calls for institutions to develop their own plans and processes in partnership with their community and workforce and employer partners. This section does provide extensive guidance and examples here around that. But again, thinking about CPL as not just a value for the student or the institution, but also this broader workforce and talent development ecosystem that we have. So with that, the next steps that we have with this work is to finalize that draft model policy guidance. We just ran out of a little bit of time, and then I had a wedding here and there, and I had to came back. But we are working with the institutions to make sure that all of that language is agreeable. Again, it's aspirational. It might make some of us feel a little bit challenged to achieve those aspirations or those standards, but truly it is done in partnership. And I would point to the process that Indiana went through with even our transfer policies and the work that Dr. Sauer and his team has led over the many, many years. It took a while, but we are a leader in the country with transfer. We can do the same with CPL, especially if we think about it in terms of transfer. Also, we are working, as we roll this out, promoting that idea of a credit for prior learning ambassador at the institutions, within our community partners. We are expecting a full report from our consulting partner, TPMA, by the end of the year that will inform those next steps in terms of phase 4, which we know we'll have to have. But I will note that that military focus will be a starting point. Now, campuses can do any and all, but certainly building on the work of the Veterans Task Force and the recommendations coming out of that to honor and to utilize that joint service transcript, the Air Force Community College transcript, and other forms of training and experience. And again, it's a starting point. I like to say, I'm going to end here, it's just a marathon. It's not a sprint, little baby steps. Again, pointing to the many-year journey that we had here in the state with transfer. I'm very encouraged by this work. And again, a big thank you to all of our partners in this work. And so with that, I think I might, unless there are questions specific, maybe we transition to this last phase.
Yes, and what we have is just to ask you to read the resolution on statewide CPL model policy guidance, and then we will take a vote. Thank you. All right, this is a resolution to adopt the Indiana Credit for Prior Learning Model Policy Guidance, whereas the Indiana Commission for Higher Education Commission has set a goal that 60% of Hoosiers complete education beyond high school by 2025. And whereas Indiana currently ranks 22nd in the nation in educational attainment, with 54% of Hoosiers having completed education and training beyond high school. And whereas approximately 2 million Hoosier adults do not have a degree or credential beyond high school, yet nearly 40% of them has some college credit. And whereas credit for prior learning, CPL, is an important tool for helping Hoosier adults further their education by honoring their prior work experiences, training, and education towards a current degree or credential. And whereas the Commission's HOPE agenda endeavors for Indiana to become a top 10 state in the utilization of CPL, and whereas Indiana, in collaboration with the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, CALE, and TPMA, coordinated 3 task force working groups of higher education and workforce development partners to develop a statewide CPL model policy guidance. Whereas the statewide CPL model policy guidance established by the aforementioned task forces strongly encourages the utilization and expansion of CPL across Indiana public higher education institutions, and aims to be a statewide framework by which to improve CPL services, transferability, standards, and partnerships.
Now therefore be it resolved that the commission adopts the statewide CPL model policy guidance and commits to work jointly with other state agencies, institutional partners, employers, and other stakeholders to implement the guidance objectives. And the commission recommends Indiana's public higher education institutions adopt the statewide CPL model policy guidance.
Thank you. And if there are no further questions, may I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution is approved. Thank you all. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, just very quickly, and I know we're running up against 3 o'clock. First of all, to Stacy and the entire team of 75 or so folks who participated in this, including commission members, this was a heavy lift. This is a big deal. And on behalf of staff, we're just grateful for the support of the commission here. This is another chance for Indiana to step up and step forward. I'd also be very remiss if I did not thank some of our very generous supporters, Strada Education, who came forward very early on to support this work with a significantly generous level of fiscal support for this. And we would not have been able to do all the things, even thus far, we've been able to do. And certainly Kale, they are the experts in the nation in this area, and we were able to tap into them. And lastly is, Stacy alluded to a couple of times, certainly Dr. Sauer, some of his team. By the way, Stacy too, this is round 2 for her. So somebody lured her away a few years ago and they convinced her to come back. But we have folks on our team who are very experienced, like commission members here with the Core Transfer Library, where that ultimately headed with things like the Indiana College Core. We see that kind of vision for credit for prior learning. And by the way, we're going to accelerate the pace of that so that we see the fruits of these labors. But hats off to all of you who participated in that. Thank you. This is one I'm incredibly hopeful we'll look back on in only a few years and see its real impact for our fellow Hoosiers. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Lowry. Is there any old business? New business?
Best wishes to Miss Stacy and her life change.
And I think we covered that, but any other comments from commission members? Okay, our next meeting of the commission is January 11th, and it'll be here in Indianapolis. If there's no other business, then we are adjourned. Thank you.